X-Talks connects professionals in the life science, medical device, and food industries with useful content like webinars, job openings, articles, and virtual meetings to help you succeed in your career. This life science-focused podcast brings together some of our editorial staff to share insights into the latest B2B industry news to keep you up to date. This week on the show, we are discussing the XBB.1.5 Omicron Subvariant and AstraZeneca's Airsupra approved as an asthma treatment. Enjoy the show.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the X-Talks Life Science Podcast. I'm Ayesha Rashid, Senior Life Science Journalist at xtalks.com, and this week I'm joined by Sydney Perlmutter, Sarah Hand, and Vera Kovacevic. Thanks for coming today. I'm going to start us off with a story about the latest Omicron subvariant called XBB.1.5 and how it's being closely watched by health officials and because it's being deemed the most transmissible variant yet. So XBB.1.5 is also known as Kraken, and it's the newest Omicron subvariant that appears to be quickly taking a strong foothold in the U.S. because it's been quickly spreading in parts of the country. As of January the 7th, it made up almost a third of new COVID-19 cases nationally, according to the CDC. Now, in the northeast of the country, XBB.1.5 made up 72% of COVID infections as of last week. So it's been on the rise, particularly in northeastern U.S. So, as I mentioned, the new Omicron subvariant appears to be the most transmissible variant of SARS-CoV-2 to date. In addition, it also appears to be very good at evading the immune system because of its mutations that makes it quite immune evasive. According to the WHO, again, they've confirmed that it does appear to be the most transmissible variant that has been detected yet. And all of this information was disclosed in a news conference that the Global Health Agency held last week. In addition, White House coronavirus response coordinator Dr. Ayesha held a news conference again last week, or I think it was the previous week, and he told reporters that the rate at which the coronavirus is being detected in wastewater has tripled or quadrupled in many parts of the U.S. And very concerning is that in recent weeks, COVID-19 hospitalizations rose by 70%, and 300 to 400 people are dying every day from COVID-19. So the XBB.1.5 Omicron subvariant, while it's spreading quite quickly across parts of the U.S., the good news is that it appears to remain quite rare in other parts of the world, in most parts of the world, actually. But it has been found so far in 29 countries. But again, cases remain very low and it doesn't appear to be spreading quickly. Also, good news is that there is no evidence to suggest that it may cause more severe illness than any other of the circulating Omicron subvariants. And another good aspect is that preliminary data shows that the current bivalent COVID-19 vaccines that target the parental strain of Omicron should provide protection against XBB.1.5 and any descendants that might appear later on. Experts also say that the antiviral COVID-19 treatment Paxlovid also remains effective against infection from XBB.1.5. Now, scientists are keeping a close watch, of course, on this new subvariant, and they say that the virus actually appears to be rapidly evolving and mutating faster than most viruses. So if we take a look at influenza, that actually mutates about every 2 to 5 years. And in comparison, SARS-CoV-2 in general mutates a lot faster. I think it's every couple of months to a year. And so this new Omicron subvariant, it appears to be evolving even faster than the parental strain. So it's something that definitely scientists are keeping a watch out for. Also, experts are saying that the reason we're seeing the continuing emergence of new variants is the issue of global vaccine inequity. In under-vaccinated regions, particularly in the Southern Hemisphere, the continued lack of access to vaccines, of course, results in the virus replicating unchecked through an unprotected population. And this is very concerning, especially in light of the fact that in high-income countries, we, are being offered multiple boosters and then throwing away unused vaccines as well. So, again, we need to really make better efforts towards global vaccine equity there. So in October actually XBB.1.5 was first identified in and around October. And back then, the WHO outlined how the new subvariant likely emerged through the genetic recombination of the Omicron BA.2.1.1 and BA.2.7.5 subvariants. So there were two subvariants that came together in the same individual, and they swapped genetic material to create a new hybrid subvariant, which is the XBB.1.5. And so scientists, I was reading a piece in the New York Times, and so scientists were saying that most recombinant SARS-CoV-2 viruses have disappeared within a few weeks or months because they couldn't really outcompete other lineages. However, it appears that XBB.1.5 gained an advantage over the previous recombinants because it gained a set of mutations from one parent strain that helps it to evade antibodies from previous infections and vaccinations. And then from the other parent strain, it received mutations that made it more immune evasive. However, while it has this plethora of mutations in its spike protein, there is a downfall to it as well. So the mutations actually lower the virus's ability to bind to host cells. And so this is perhaps why experts say it hasn't been able to readily overtake other COVID strains, especially in other parts of the world. But that could rapidly change again in places where vaccination rates are low. And as we've been hearing, China has been seeing a surge in COVID infections in the last couple of months. But it's actually unclear what version of Omicron is driving those infections because there's a lack of information from the country. Also, so in the U.S., thanks to large-scale sequencing efforts, scientists have been able to keep a close eye on XBB and other variants as well. However, scientists are noting that worldwide sequencing efforts have been on the decline, and so that is making it a challenge to monitor emerging and new evolving forms of the virus around the world. So, of course, the rise of COVID-19 infections in the fall was expected because of, flu season and just you have more viruses in circulation and hitting people harder. So there was the concern of the triple-demic concoction of respiratory viruses of influenza, RSV, and COVID-19 in the fall and winter months. And so while we've kind of gone past RSV and influenza, COVID remains at the top of the priority list, and it's in active circulation still. So, I just wanted to get your thoughts on this new Omicron subvariant. Are you concerned? Is it expected? And what do you also think about I know that masks are not being mandated, of course, but we have been hearing about them being recommended once again by health officials in countries around the world, also here in Canada. But I just wanted to know, did we let go of COVID mitigation strategies a bit too prematurely? And that's why we're seeing, these variants keep cropping up. And what is your take on that?
Well, I think the most important thing is if people have symptoms, they should stay at home, so, and if you know that you, are in regular contact with someone that doesn't have a strong immune system or that's sick or very old, you should try to limit your exposure to large public spaces. So I think kind of the recommendations that we got at the start of the pandemic or in the middle of the pandemic, they're still good to use now. Also, I did kind of notice that with every new variant that pops up, they seem to be saying it's more transmissible.
Yeah.
But I don't know if they could know that for certain unless they do some lab tests, because like if people aren't masking and if people have like stopped their like COVID-19 prevention measures, like we can't really, how would we know if it's truly more transmissible or
Yeah,
if,
I think that data comes from like lab tests.
okay.
So so they look at the other variants and other strains and do tests in the lab to kind of determine that. And also, I guess, computer modeling to take a look at the mutations and how they may functionally impact the virus's ability to be to infect and be transmitted. And it's not surprising that each variant is more transmissible than the previous, because that's kind of the whole point of viruses kind of evolving. What is it? Survival of the fittest. They just evolved to get better and more effective at infecting host cells. And so that's why each newer form of the virus has greater infectivity, or it's more transmissible, because that's kind of the whole point. It wants to evolve to just keep getting better and stronger. But again, there's a balance that has to be created, because obviously it can't be so transmissible or so virulent that's going to kill off the host cell. So that's sort of where viruses, it's very fascinating in terms of the evolutionary trajectory of viruses and how they come to evolve and what kinds of mutations are beneficial and things like that.
Yeah, I think I was reading something recently that said, the most successful viruses are those, obviously, that don't kill their host. That's not, beneficial for the virus. But also, that are able to kind of hide and lay dormant for longer periods of time. So I believe like the herpes virus is like an ideal one for that. Speaking to your point on, vaccine inequities that are persisting, even this long after we've had these vaccines available, I wanted to know if you knew where we're at in terms of the development of oral vaccines and other vaccines that maybe don't require the same sort of storage requirements. So the cold chain we talked about before. As some of our listeners might know, this is only my second podcast after coming back from a year-long maternity leave, and so I've very much been like not paying attention to the news as much over the past year. So any updates on that?
Yeah, I have not come across any updates on oral vaccines. I know there was big talk about that, since the beginning of the pandemic when vaccines were under development. But I think there was something in the summer about a company, I think it was Vaxart or something, that it's developing an experimental oral tablet vaccine. So that's pretty interesting, but really haven't heard a lot since then. I'm sure, things are chugging along, but I'm not sure if that's the only issue in terms of global vaccine equity or inequity in this case. Sure, global supply chains initially weren't able to handle sort of the sub-zero storage requirements of the mRNA vaccines. But I think, a lot of supply chains and a lot of manufacturers were able to overcome that. And, they were able to sort of find, ways to overcome those kinds of challenges for the most part. Not that, it's perfected. But it just seems that uptake among people in other countries and developing countries, it's just lagging for other reasons as well. I think a lack of awareness and maybe ineffective campaigns, or maybe a lack of campaigns to help inform people about the importance of COVID vaccines. It just seems that there's no interest in just getting them in other countries. And I think, governments maybe didn't make as much of a concerted effort to raise awareness, and it just seems that there are a lot of other factors at play. And I know in the beginning securing enough doses and all of that was an issue, but then that doesn't seem to be the issue anymore. So it's not really a supply thing per se, I don't think anymore, but it's just, okay, well, and the attitude in a lot of places, it's like, okay, well, COVID's done. We're done with it. And so there's no interest in getting vaccinated. So I think those kinds of attitudes and things are also a big problem, big part of the problem.
Do you think it's also still a matter of differences in wealth between countries? So, some countries can't afford to bring in many doses, let's say, of the vaccine, or, choose not to spend their money on population health.
I have a hard time believing that now. I know that was a thing before, but I mean, you have initiatives like, I think, Gavi and all through the World Health Organization to, give developing countries free access to free vaccines. And so there are a lot of programs in place. And, I've written about it in the past year or two. A lot of manufacturers like AstraZeneca and all of these companies were also donating supplies and vaccines. But so I really don't think that is an issue, a primary issue anymore. And you don't hear about that either. So, I mean, it's obviously a factor, but I just feel it's the lax attitude towards COVID now in terms of, okay, yeah, it's over. We don't really need to do anything about it. I think that's more of an issue now as compared to in the beginning of the pandemic. So, and there were countries donating vaccine doses. So like, there were a lot of concerted efforts around that to get vaccines to countries that may not necessarily have been able to afford it initially. But I think we got, we did pretty well on that part. So I think there are other issues at play as well. I mean, just in like North America, we can see like people are done with COVID. And so I know a lot of people that didn't get boosters because they were like, I don't need it. And it's
that's interesting. And I'm sure it's something that, varies from country to country. And we have our views of living, in a wealthy country. And that'd be something interesting to explore and see, like, what are the reasons. And I'm sure they're very, very varied.
Yeah.
Ayesha, I wanted to ask you, why is this Omicron variant called Kraken?
Yeah, that's interesting because I think it was a Canadian scientist that actually nicknamed it Kraken. And I think just, I guess, for ease of like just having a name as opposed to like, these numbered variants and things like that. Let me just look this up. Okay, there it is. I came across this. So the Kraken name apparently comes from a biology professor who's taken on the job of demystifying COVID variants by giving them mythological nicknames. So apparently the name Kraken derives from some kind of mythology. But
it says it's a legendary sea monster, which I think it's like a...
I'm not sure if that's demystifying anything.
I think it's some sort of, I'm looking at pictures, like a really big, like a giant squid or something. That's right. Yeah, that's right. That's interesting. I guess it takes some of the, I don't know if I would use the word demystifying either, but I think it takes some of the, like, eyes glaze over kind of when you're reading the variant name and you're not taking it in. Like, maybe he thinks, or I don't know, you didn't really say if it was a he or she, or maybe you did, but maybe the scientist who names it, it's a he. Okay, maybe he thought, make more like interesting sounding, make people pay attention more.
Yeah, like maybe they used up a lot of Greek letters,
Yeah.
All right, moving on to our next story. This is about the FDA approval of a new asthma treatment. So AstraZeneca's Airsupra was recently approved as the first in-class combination asthma treatment for adult patients with asthma. The FDA granted approval to AstraZeneca's Airsupra, formerly known as PT027, for the as-needed treatment or prevention of bronchoconstriction, as well as to reduce the risk of asthma attacks or asthma exacerbations in individuals aged 18 years and older with asthma. So, Airsupra is a pressurized fixed-dose combination rescue medication inhaler containing a beta-2 agonist called albuterol and a corticosteroid as well. And it's the very first medication that contains both an anti-inflammatory inhaled corticosteroid and a short-acting beta agonist to be approved in the U.S. So while albuterol rescue inhalers are currently used to alleviate symptoms of an asthma attack, they don't treat the underlying inflammation. So that's why this new drug includes the corticosteroid component. And so in a statement issued by AstraZeneca, an expert from the American College of Allergy, Asthma, and Immunology, who was the former president of it, Bradley Chips, said that the approval of Airsupra means that for the first time, adults with asthma in the U.S. have a rescue treatment to manage both their symptoms as well as the inflammatory nature of their disease. Airsupra is being jointly developed by AstraZeneca and Avilion, which is also a UK-based drug development company, and the company received funding from Blackstone Life Sciences, Royalty Pharma, and Abingworth for the drug's co-development program. So asthma is a lung condition that is usually chronic and long-term, which causes the airways to become narrow, inflamed, and potentially produce extra mucus. And this can result in difficulties in breathing, shortness of breath, coughing, and wheezing when breathing out. And of course, symptoms vary from person to person, and the severity of symptoms can also change over time. In the US, it's estimated that about 25 million people have asthma, and worldwide, 262 million. According to Executive Vice President Biopharmaceuticals R&D at AstraZeneca, Min Pangalos, about 10 million people in the U.S. experience asthma exacerbations or asthma attacks each year, and uncontrolled asthma could cost the U.S. economy billions of dollars over the next 20 years. So in light of this, he said that the approval is good news for this segment of adult asthma patients who make up more than 80% of patients in the U.S. So the FDA approval of Airsupra was based on results from a couple of phase 3 studies, and one is the Mandela randomized double-blind multicenter study that involved over 3,000 asthma patients. And the study looked at Airsupra's effectiveness in reducing the risk of severe asthma attacks in adults, adolescents, and children aged 4 to 11 years with moderate to severe asthma. Compared with albuterol, adults and adolescents, now children were excluded here, treated with Airsupra had a 28% reduction in the risk of a severe asthma attack as assessed by the time to first severe asthma attack. In another trial called Denali, Airsupra demonstrated significant improvement in lung function compared to treatment with albuterol and budesonide, which is the corticosteroid, each alone in patients with mild to moderate asthma, 12 years of age and older. So the safety and tolerability of Airsupra was consistent with the known profiles of the individual components in the medication, and the onset of action and duration of effect were similar for Airsupra and albuterol. So the FDA has only given the green light to Airsupra in adults, as it remains unsure of its risk-benefit profile in children. So it hasn't really elaborated anything beyond that in terms of why the approval was only given to for the adult indication. But I did read a couple of months ago when the FDA was reviewing Airsupra's application that it wasn't convinced that there was a benefit for children in terms of the risk-benefit profile. So the approval, nonetheless, of course, is a major win for AstraZeneca in light of the company's ending market exclusivity of its blockbuster inhaler, Symbicort. Now, generics maker Viatris was able to win over a remaining patent on the drug, but then AstraZeneca came back and countered it with its own legal win in December last year. So, again, you have the drug going off patent and generics entering the market. So this is an opportune and a good time for AstraZeneca to have won this approval for a new drug in the segment. And according to analysts at Jefferies, Airsupra could reach $500 million in sales. So I want to get your thoughts on this new approval. And of course, asthma, again, is a condition that affects many in the U.S. and worldwide. And I think this could be game-changing, in my opinion.
Yeah, we've all heard of asthma. It's not like a rare disease. It's not even uncommon, I would say. And I think this is a great approval. I definitely think their next steps would be to investigate the drug more in children, because asthma is one of those conditions that it tends to be chronic and it tends to be common in children. So I think it would really help. But I didn't even know this. I learned this about a month ago. People that recently buy a pet, they can get allergy triggered asthma because the pet hair and just the pet itself, they can trigger an allergic asthma attack. So there's different types of asthma, and I just learned about that last month. So some people may develop asthma and they may not even know they will develop it under some different circumstances. One of them
cause and changes in their environment and what's around them, for sure.
And I read that even though people with pets can develop asthma, almost a majority of people are unwilling to give up their pet. So they just find ways to deal with it, or if they have 2 floors or 3 floors, they kind of don't sleep on the same level as the pet, and they really try to think of ways to keep their pet but treat their asthma symptoms.
That's really interesting, Vera. I also didn't know that asthma was something you could develop later in life. I kind of thought it was something that usually showed up when you were a kid, or at least that you had some sort of history of breathing difficulties. My dad was actually diagnosed a few years ago with asthma, and so I know from his experience with inhalers, he certainly uses a rescue inhaler. I think it's great that there is a product now that also treats the underlying, issues of asthma, and isn't just the steroid to help in that moment. I think that's really good that there's a product for that.
Yeah, definitely. That's why I think it'll definitely be game changing because, the previous rescue inhalers, they just had the beta 2 agonist, and so it would just be kind of like a Band-Aid treatment, but this contains a corticosteroid, so it's really also targeting the inflammatory aspect of it, and so that's sort of the causal nature of it. So it's great that we have this option now for patients. So I think it's definitely a very big and important approval.
Yeah, and as you said, Ayesha, certainly great timing for AstraZeneca to get this approval, considering Symbicort is falling off that patent cliff. So yeah, good timing for them.
Yep. It's a win-win essentially in this case for both patients and, the maker. So
I actually appreciate the name of this drug. It reminds me of a sneaker, something that Nike would release.
Air Jordans.
Yeah. And I think Supra is actually a sneaker brand.
Isn't it a car?
It might be.
Too?
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I just appreciate when when they relate to what the product is doing, air, and when it sounds cool, which is very rare. So
very true. Yeah.
Yeah. I wonder if they'll take advantage of that cool factor, when they do their marketing for the drug, if they make any commercials and things. I know it's actually really this is another interesting thing. It's there's a lot that goes into naming drugs, and so I know that the FDA, you can't call your drug super makes you live longer. You know what I mean? You can't make it incredible claims in the name of the drug. And so there's this fine balance between the marketing people at the company, trying to come up with something that sounds I don't know. Sounds like something you'd want to take, I guess, or sounds like something that would make you feel better, without making it, misleading in any way. So I think that would be a really interesting case study, maybe to have someone on the podcast who works in that area and kind of pick their brain. Yeah.
I know when the COVID vaccines were being named, because before they were just called the Pfizer vaccine, and like it's like a BNT, I forget what the code was, the code name. And yeah, it's interesting how like there are companies out there that drug companies will commission to come up with names, and then they'll sit with them and come up with it. I think Moderna's vaccine is Spikevax, right? But I feel like for those names didn't actually like get a lot of traction. Like they're still known as the Moderna vaccine or the Pfizer vaccine. But no, in the case of these kinds of drugs, I think it's a whole different ballgame. And AstraZeneca's previous or its other asthma drug, Symbicort, like it's okay. But yeah, Airsupra has a better ring to it. And I think it's a lot more relatable, as Sydney you brought up. So I think that's a great point, to have drug names that are, I guess, easy to pronounce, easy to remember, and kind of relate to the product. So I think that's cool. Yeah, for sure. All right, that's the end of this episode of the X Talks Life Science podcast. If you liked today's show, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. Thanks, everyone, and see you next week. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the X Talks Life Science podcast. If you enjoyed our discussions today, please share the episode with your friends and colleagues, and be sure to subscribe in order to be notified when a new episode is released. To join in on the discussion, you can find X Talks on social media, email podcast@xtalks.com, or comment on the articles directly. Links are in the show description. Take a moment to join our community at xtalks.com to get access to everything we have to offer, including webinars, job listings, virtual meetings, articles, and more. The views and opinions expressed in the podcast are those of the speakers sharing them. They should not be taken as professional advice and do not necessarily reflect the policy or position Honeycomb Worldwide. For further information, email us at podcast@xtalks.com. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week.